All right, so it's 12:02. We'll go ahead and get started. Thank you everyone for joining us here today. I am beyond excited to introduce our speaker. Um, but thank you for joining us for Vision Capital's virtual lunch and learn. I'm beyond excited to introduce our speaker, who also happens to be one of my best friends and a true inspiration, Allyson Spungin. Allyson and I met through competitive powerlifting, and from the start, her passion for strength and commitment to helping others build confidence through movement has been incredibly inspiring to me. Allyson is a certified personal trainer, nutrition coach, and a nationally ranked powerlifter and bodybuilder. With over a decade of experience, she has worked with strength and endurance athletes, individuals navigating weight loss and injury recovery, and those looking to maintain strength as they age. She also specializes in guiding women through major life transitions, including pre and postnatal and pre and postmenopause, addressing the often overlooked variables that come with these stages. Today, Allyson will be sharing why resistance training is one of the most powerful tools for maintaining muscle, bone health, and balance as we age. She'll be providing practical strategies to support longevity, quality of life, and overall well-being. Whether you're already lifting weights or just curious about where to start, you're in for an insightful and inspiring conversation. We will have time at the end for Q&A, so please feel free to drop your questions in the chat and we'll address them at the end. A recording of today's session, along with a copy of the slides, will be sent out afterwards. Now we're going to dive in, and please join me in welcoming my dear friend and powerhouse of knowledge, Allyson Spungin.
Hi, everybody. Thank you so much, Gina. If you want to go ahead and make me host so I can share my screen, please. Super excited to be here. Normally, I would give myself an introduction, but Gina just did such a good job with that. And yeah, let's get started. So I will pull this up here for you guys. Okay, let's get this going. All right. So welcome. How to optimize your physiology through resistance training and age powerfully. Heavy emphasis on the powerful part here. So at 30 years old, we start to see some shifts biologically, physiologically, right? So I will go into what happens and what some folks might experience. We lose about 1% of bone density per year. We lose about 3 to 8% of muscle mass per decade. This age-related decline can then lead to sarcopenia, which is gradual loss of muscle mass. And if you've heard, I'm sure some of these will sound familiar. And if you do know the definition of them, I'm sorry for the repetition, but I do need to mention it because it's important. Joint degeneration, so osteoarthritis, a condition that causes the breakdown of cartilage and that results in joint pain, stiffness, and limited range of motion. And osteoporosis, that's a big one that we'll hear a lot about, a condition in which bones become increasingly brittle and prone to fracture. This is very common in postmenopausal women. The rates are much higher. So speaking of menopause, women will experience a profound hormonal shift called perimenopause, and that occurs 5 to 10 years before menopause, generally between the ages of 48 and 55. As women start out with less muscle than men, they lose more muscle with age because of these hormonal shifts that aren't conducive for muscle making. A little bit about what's going on. We have estrogen and progesterone levels. Those are sex hormones. They fluctuate and they decline through your 40s. And with that decline comes changes in how the body stores fat, often accumulating in the midsection, increasing risk of fatty liver and cardiovascular disease, less reactive to muscle making stimulus. So it's easier to store fat and harder to build muscle, essentially. Increased difficulty for the body to synthesize the protein you eat into the muscle that you need. We all know that protein is important. So even when you're consuming it, you might not be consuming enough to make sure that it is being synthesized. So more stats for women here. Strength declines 30% between the ages of 50 and 70. And it starts to really take a nosedive after that. So I am setting you up to talk about the benefits of training, but this is just the importance of, what happens when you are untrained. Researchers of this is a study that I found of the landmark framing and disability study findings in percentage of untrained women. So they were not resistance training, unable to lift 10 pounds. So these are the percentages of folks that could not pick up 10 pounds. 40% of women between the ages of 55 and 64 could not pick up 10 pounds. 45% of women between the ages of 65 and 74, and 65% of women between the ages of 75 and 84. That's a really high percentage. So just to give you kind of an idea here, we're not even able to pick up a bag of cat food, okay? So this is why strength training is synonymous with independence as you age. Because if you are untrained and you look at these stats, it becomes increasingly difficult to function in life. So stats for men, let's talk about men. Testosterone levels will start to decline. With that comes loss of muscle mass, strength, and bone density, very similar. Noticeable changes will present themselves starting at 40, and they accelerate at 60 years old. Men will experience about a 1 to 2% drop in testosterone each year, starting around 40. So outside of strength loss, men may experience increased fatigue, changes in libido as well. So here is some good news. After all of that, you can mitigate age-related decline with the proper training programs. That's where Coach Al comes in on the bright side of things. Let's talk about the top 10 reasons. There's a lot of them. I narrowed down as best as I could to 10 here, why you need to strength train. Okay, why strength training needs to be a non-negotiable. It will reduce your risk of osteoporosis and fracture for women by over 40%. Metabolic health gains. Every pound of muscle burns roughly 3 times more calories at rest compared to fat tissue. So the more muscle that you have at rest, the more fired up your metabolism is. And we hear a lot of them, I'm getting older, so my metabolism is slowing down. No, that's not necessarily the case. You're getting older and moving less, or not training properly, not eating enough protein. Those are the reasons why metabolism often slows down, not just because you're getting older. Muscle tissue absorbs over 80% of glucose. So that's the sugar that serves as the primary energy source for the body from your bloodstream, significantly boosting insulin sensitivity and reducing diabetes risks. So if you have the opposite, if you have insulin resistance, this will increase your risk of diabetes. So the more muscle you have, the more chance of you being insulin sensitive versus resistant, reduced risk of diabetes. Okay, correct. It's a non-negotiable. We're still going here. Increased muscle mass releases anti-inflammatory proteins, which lower your risk of arthritis, heart disease, and autoimmune issues. Increased spinal bone mass. Postmenopausal women who participate in a year-long resistance training study experienced an increase of 9%. Just 1 year, they had a 9% increase of bone mass. It's incredible. Strength training naturally increases testosterone, growth hormone, which helps maintain tissues and organs throughout life, and lowers stress hormones. So we all know, we've heard, I'm not sure if you're familiar with cortisol, right? And often if you get your blood work done and your cortisol is high, your doctor's not going to be happy. Neither is Coach Al. But high cortisol is not conducive for muscle making either. Okay, so this is our last slide here and why it's so important. Higher muscle mass is associated with lower risk of cognitive decline, dementia, and Alzheimer's disease. Okay, so we're talking a lot about physiological stuff, but this is super important, right? To note what's going on with your brain and that correlation to muscle. That's very interesting to me. Enhanced strength makes daily tasks easier, promoting independence and quality of life, which is very valuable. Strength training just 2 times a week has been proven to reduce the likelihood of dying from cancer by up to 31% for women. More muscle mass decreases the likelihood to experience premature death to chronic illness by up to 50%, specifically for women. Pretty staggering stuff. So what should my resistance training program look like? So here I am going on and on about how important it is to strength train. Now, there are several people on this call. I have no idea where you're at in terms of your fitness journey. I've had some folks in their 60s that have started working with me this year that have never stepped in a gym before in their lives. And then I have a 64-year-old client who was a college athlete, swimmer, and has trained her whole life, but is not optimizing her training. And now she's working with me. So we will just go into some very general guidelines here. The goal is to efficiently build, if the goal is to efficiently build lean muscle and strength, this is what we're talking about here. Frequency, 3 to 4 times a week strength training total should be sufficient. You can have different styles of training programs. So we can do a more hitting all muscle groups in one session. So that would be a total body type of workout, or an upper body, lower body split. So then you have a lower upper focus. The session should be about 45 to 60 minutes. It doesn't need to be longer than that. How heavy? This very much depends, but in general, so I didn't even put this here, so I don't want to talk about it. If you can pick something up and put it back down, or perform an exercise for 20 reps or higher and feel like you have a couple of reps left in the tank, we call that RIR, which is reps in reserve. That is a clear sign that you can lift more. If you get to 20 and you feel like, okay, that was easy, but I want to challenge myself, clear sign you can lift more. So we don't want to be in the gym for a ton of time. We'll talk about reps and sets, and you shouldn't be lifting something 20 times, but that is just like a very general guide to see, okay, is this heavy enough for me? There's different kinds of lifts. So we have compound lifts. So that's going to be anywhere from 3 to 6 reps, 4 to 5 sets in your workout. We will go into what a compound lift is next. And then we also want to have isolation exercises that support your compound lifts. And that's going to be anywhere from 16 to 15 reps and 2 to 4 sets of those in a given session. Program design. So compound lifts. These are exercises that engage multiple muscle groups and joints simultaneously. So 60 to 70% of your training session should be focused on these big lifts. So some examples of this are squats, deadlifts, hip thrusts, bench press, overhead press, lunges, bent over rows, and pull-ups. There are more, but these are just some of my favorites. You can put these in the category of most bang for your buck exercises. So if you can get the most bang from your buck, it would make a lot of sense to put the majority of your training session intensity into those movements. So we would do those first. Then we would head into isolation exercises. So those are single joint movements that bias a specific muscle group. So 30 to 40% of the session should be spent on isolation exercises. Some examples here would be lateral raises, bicep curls, kickbacks, and bridges. Okay, so we have a starting point, right? How do we continue to get better? So this is where we implement progressive overload. Progressive overload is gradually increasing weights weekly or biweekly by 2.5 to 5%. Increasing weight is not the only way to measure progressive overload. So you could have the same weight, but maybe you're doing a couple more repetitions of this weight. Maybe you're adding a pause. Maybe you're focusing on tempo. So you're not just doing the exercise to do it. You're slowing it down. You're adding a 3-second eccentric and a 3-second concentric. So if, say, for instance, you're doing a squat and you're just kind of like hammering through it, you can increase your progressive overload by not necessarily adding more weight to the squat, but taking 3 gradual seconds to get to the bottom of the squat and 3 seconds to get back up. So those are just some different examples outside of continuing to add load. And then you need to rest between your sets. I program rest for all of my clients in between their sets. I often get some pushback on that. So I really need to sit here for 2 minutes. Yes. The more complex the lift, so like for compound exercises, the longer the rest break between sets, because you want to set yourself up to optimally crush the next one. If you're still tired from your previous one, that doesn't make a ton of sense. 60 seconds will be on the low end, and that will be more for like your isolation exercises. So what about cardio? Okay, so cardio, heart health is so important. Everybody needs some form of cardiovascular activity, period. Everyone. However, it shouldn't be the star of the show to combat the effects of aging that we are talking about here. The focus needs to be on resistance training with cardio in the program. So what kind of cardio? How much? 120 to 150 minutes a week of zone 2 is going to be in general good for almost everybody to do. I have to say almost, and I have to say in general, because everybody is different, right? But this is a very generalized, like, yes, I would be okay with telling you that this is a good recommendation here. And this is an intensity, zone 2 is an intensity level of about 5. So you should be able to have a in-depth conversation while you're doing your zone 2. It could be something like brisk walking, rowing, swimming, dancing, hiking. Low key is the vibe, okay? For postmenopausal women and men, 40 plus folks interested in upping muscle gain, we should be having more high intensity interval cardio and sprint exposure throughout the week. So yes, I am telling you, the older that you are, the focus should be lifting heavy and adding sprints into your week. hear me out. So here's an example of a sprint. So duration, we want to do this about 2 to 3 times a week. It's going to be 16 minutes on a cardio machine of your choice. You don't have to run. I think when people hear sprint, they're like, oh my God, this girl's telling me to go to the track and run. Like I haven't ran since high school. No, there are several different modalities that you can sprint with, right? So you want to start with a 3-minute warm-up. We always start with a warm-up. We're going to do 5 rounds of 1:40 of moderate intensity and 20 all out. You should not be able to have a conversation with anybody during your sprint exposure. That's going to be for about 10 minutes total, and then a 3-minute cool down. Some modalities that would be great for just if we're considering low impact, the Airdyne or the assault bike is amazing for sprints. You can get in the pool and you can do sprints. You can get on the rower and you can do sprints. You can do it on the arc trainer. So it doesn't need to be on the treadmill. It doesn't need to be on the track. You don't have to run in order to sprint. Jump training for healthy bones. So this is another thing people, I'm like, okay, I'm telling also the active aging folks, yes, I want you jumping. And I do. Okay, why? It stimulates bone growth and bone density. It helps prevent osteoporosis. It enhances strength and power. It challenges balance and coordination to help prevent fall risk. So some examples would be lateral hops, pogo jumps, jumping rope, broad jumps, jump squats, jumping lunges. And we only need about 3 sessions of 10 minutes of this a week. Now, let me take a step back here. We always walk before we run. We always do the low impact thing before we do the high impact thing. So let's take a jump squat, for example. If you are not familiar, your body is not used to jumping, you don't have jump training in your program at all, what we would do is master an air squat without any weight. Then we would add weight to your squat and load that up. Then we would do a modified squat jump where I'd have you hold on to something like a bar, something like that, a bench, and you would get just a little bit of air off the ground and teach you how to land properly. Then we move into like bigger jumps. So I will talk about this at the end, but you never want to go 0 to 100, especially with jump training, but it's super important. Nutrition strategy. Okay, everyone. So I am a strength coach, clearly, and I'm also a nutrition coach. This webinar is more so about the strength component of things, but there was no way that I could go without having a little bit of nutrition stuff in here. But again, just like your strength training program, nutrition is super specific to the individual. So these are just going to be some very general guidelines, okay? So if the goal is fuel muscle growth, strength, and to recover properly, carbs are not the enemy. We love a carbohydrate. So complex carbs are important for training performance and recovery. Some examples of my favorites: sweet potato, oats, fruit, quinoa, beets, sprouted bread, brown rice, etc. Fiber is just as important as protein. Aim to get a minimum of 25 grams of fiber from your carb choices daily. This is going to be for women. Men, we're looking more like 35. Healthy fats. Fat is brain power, okay? And we were just talking about previously how important it is to strength train for your brain. How you eat is also super important for your cognitive function as well. Healthy fats such as olive oil, avocado, raw nuts, seeds, hemp seeds, flax, fatty fish improve cognitive function, memory, and help prevent against neurodegenerative diseases. They also aid in the absorption of nutrients, so like fat-soluble vitamins. So if you take vitamin D and you are not taking it with a fat source, you are wasting your money. So it's really important to make sure that you have some healthy fats on your plate as well. Protein is the powerhouse. Protein is so crucial, okay? We want to aim for 30 to 40 grams of protein per meal. Now, this is for our active aging folks here, right? 30 and under can get away with a little bit less protein per meal. And we want about 20 to 30. 30 would be great, but 20 is okay at snacks. Or you want to think about it as 1 to 1.2 grams of protein per pound of your body weight. That's a very general way. So also, I think it's important, we want to diversify your protein sources. Like, yes, lean meat. You know, when I have some folks come to me, especially weight loss folks, they're like, I can only eat chicken and broccoli. Like, no, that's not true. I'm not saying that. You can also eat fish, egg whites, lentils, tofu, chickpeas, tempeh, seitan, edamame. So there are tons of great plant protein sources as well. Okay, so recovery and lifestyle. So this is really important. If you are not recovering well, your program will not be as effective. So let's talk about the number one thing here with recovery will be sleep. We want to aim for 7 to 9 hours of quality sleep nightly for muscle repair and recovery. Active recovery, a perfect time for your zone 2 to shine, everybody. And walking. Okay. I love every single one of my clients has a step goal. This is where having a step goal is key. Bonus points if you can get outside. Manage your stress. Chronic stress will hinder muscle growth, period. Incorporate stress reduction practices into your week. Some of my favorites are yoga, guided meditation. You can download an app and do that. Journaling, reducing caffeine intake, breath work, spending time in nature, etc. Shut screen time down as early as possible. So I was working on this webinar last week and I was up a little late and I literally could not fall asleep. And also blue blocker glasses are essential for when you're staring at your screens, especially at night, but I would try to shut it down as early as possible to maximize your quality sleep. Okay, so please know, and I've said this like 10 times, but I'm gonna say it again. These are some very general guidelines. Customization is key. If you have a history of injury, any medical concerns, you should make sure your program is as specific to you as possible. We never want to go 0 to 100. You can always progress, but too much too soon will often hold you back and can potentially lead to injury. So that is what I have today. This is my contact information. Please take this down. I know we're going to be sending the slides out, so you'll have to refer to, but if you want to hop on a discovery call with me, this is what I offer everybody that comes across anything that I put out there that's interested in talking more about how to optimize their programming. We discover what will work best for you. We can talk about what you're already doing. So you can follow me on Instagram here. You can shoot me an email here, and I would absolutely love to hear from you. So I guess we should open up the floor for some questions.
So it looks like we did have one question come through here. What's the functional difference between compound lifts and an isolation exercise?
The functional difference?
What is the functional difference between compound lifts and isolation exercises?
Okay, so I think on that one slide, I went through that a little bit more in detail. So an isolation exercise is going to be a little bit more specific to one muscle group. So a bicep curl. And then if we're talking about functionality, things like deadlifting, squatting, we do so much more of that in real life. How often do we pick things up? So learning how to do that really well is super important. Squatting, getting up and sitting down and standing up without, losing your balance. Again, that pertains to something like fall prevention, risk prevention, that type of thing. So that is why 60 to 70% of the focus in a training plan should be around the compounds. And then the isolation exercises are just kind of like the icing on the cake. I hope that answers that question.
Awesome. Yes, and we have another one. What's the difference in results between high weight, low reps and low weight and high reps?
The difference in results from
high weight, low reps and low weight, high reps.
The difference in results, it's going to be really person specific. The goal is to train with as much intensity as possible. So sometimes when we have the higher reps, lower weights, it's almost kind of like we're ticking a box type of training. For active aging folks, my people live in the rep scheme of, especially for compounds, anywhere between 5 to 8. So I would suggest doing lower reps, higher weight to up the quality, right? So it's not necessarily quantity. We really want to focus on the quality of sets. So we want to train, we want to get as much stimulus as possible. So the more weight, the more stimulus. So with the isolation exercises, that's when you can lower, you're going to have to lower the weight a little bit and up the reps. But again, it's going to be super person specific, and it's going to be about who is going to get the most intensity, who can finish the training session like, wow, the most. And that's going to range for everybody. But I think that's kind of like when I was giving the general guidelines, that's where I would live at.
Awesome. We've got a couple more questions coming in here. So, how much muscle mass can an individual in their mid 60s or older realistically expect to gain if they're not trying to do bodybuilding?
That's a really good question. um, Again, it's going to depend on the individual. So this is where also lifestyle factors come into play as well. How often are we training? What's our training intensity look like? I'd have to see videos of this person training. What's our technique like? Are we recovering properly? Are we sleeping? Are we eating enough protein? So all of that stuff is going to contribute. If all of those ducks are in a row, everybody, as a bodybuilder, it is way harder to gain muscle than you think. You know, some folks will say to me, I don't want to get bulky. Lord, I wish it was easy to get bulky, folks. It's not. So if all of the ducks are in a row, you're ticking all of the boxes. We look at your blood work and your hormones are all in a good place and all these things, right? You have everything, set. I think you could look to put on anywhere between 1 to 5 pounds of muscle in 6 months to a year. Really broad scope, but it's difficult to do. And then again, everybody's physiology is going to have something to do with that rate.
Awesome. Okay. Let's see here. How important is progressive overload to maintain benefits if you've been lifting for years?
Very important. Super important. One of the things I like the most about strength training is the limit does not exist, but the way that you can always be challenging yourself. So like I said, maybe you're not necessarily adding a ton of weight, but if you just want to, add stimulus, I think that it's super important, again, to look at the intensity. I would recommend that you try challenging yourself. And like I said, maybe add more reps, add a pause, look at your tempo. If you have been lifting for years, which I have, right? I have been consistently strength training at least 5 days a week for 15 years. I'm always finding ways to get better at the thing. And that's why there's different definitions that fall under progressive overload, but you should always be focusing on harnessing a day one mindset and going in and trying to get better in some way.
Awesome. Could you give us a pep talk for going back to the gym if it's been a long lapse, say since the pandemic? Maybe for someone who's been going to the gym for years prior to that. How would a person get back at their own pace? Maybe they're worried about too big of a push or a trainer who's going to have them do too much before they're ready.
I think that those are really valid concerns. So if you're getting back into the gym and you are going to, work with somebody, always do a trial session, let them know where you're at. And then if this person can't meet you there, they're probably a bad trainer, which exists. And also congratulations to you for making the choice to go back in. I know that it can be a challenging, and as cliche as it sounds, y'all, like starting truly is the hardest part. It really is. And then once you commit that time to showing up for yourself consistently, it'll start to feel weird not to. And then it becomes part of your routine again. But again, having a plan is so key. So I would recommend, if you are going to go into a gym, you do want to use a trainer at your gym, to have a consultation with them, feel them out, see what's up. If you feel like you're not even ready for that yet, always have some sort of plan going into the gym with you. So then you're not, feeling a little like aimless or I don't know what I'm even doing here. Right. So a plan is crucial. It's everything. Structure is key.
Awesome. Is it okay to alternate strength exercises? I believe they're talking about supersetting, alternate sets of bench and pull-ups, and decreasing the rest period to under 1 minute.
Is it okay? I mean, as long as you don't hurt yourself, everything it's okay with me. From a just programming optimization, I would say no, because those are two big movements, and you're going to get the more out of the movement if you give yourself more rest time. If you're in a pinch and you're supersetting the two, I don't think there's anything inherently wrong with supersets. We just need to make sure that there's enough rest time. And something like a pull up and a bench, you have opposing muscle groups, which is ideal for supersets. So then, like, even though you're doing the pull up, you're not focusing on front side. Then you do the bench, you're not necessarily, well, depends on how you're benching. If you're doing more of a powerlifting style bench, you are using your lats. So you want to make sure that the superset makes sense. And you just want to make sure that, I would say, if it's a compound lift, you want to give yourself a minimum of 2 minutes.
And could you just clarify what it means to do a superset?
A superset would be just like we were talking, I think what they asked. So like you do an exercise. So say I'll give the example of this person's question. I do a set of bench. So I do 5 reps of bench. And then I walk over from the bench to the pull-up bars, and then I do 8 pull-ups. And then I go back to bench, I do bench. And then I walk over to the pull-ups and I do pull-ups. So you're doing one after the other. That's what a superset is.
Awesome, thank you. Do activities such as tennis, basketball, or pickleball serve to a degree as jump training because of the fast starts and stops?
That's a great question. And I'm going to say no, because it's not enough impact to get the most benefit for your bone density. I have a tennis player, and she said to me, it's a lot of standing around. So like I said in the slide, I want 10 minutes just dedicated to jump training, and focusing on like the impact, because that's what's going to help build your bones.
Awesome. What would you say is the best way to determine one's training heart rate for cardio?
Like a target heart rate, or just to see what it is?
Both.
So for target heart rate, it's going to depend on the goal. So if we're talking about something like a zone 2, your target heart rate is going to be more like around 110 to 120. If we're doing like fat loss, and we need to up the intensity of your duration and during cardio, it's going to be somewhere between like 130 and 150. Again, this is all very dependent upon the individual. In terms of tracking your heart rate, a watch would be great for that. You also have the band around the chest. Some people find that super uncomfortable and like invasive. I've tried all the watches. All the trackers, read all the studies about how inaccurate the majority of them are. And my favorite so far is the Garmin. So if I was going to plug one, I'd say get a Garmin watch. But you're determining what your HR goal should be for just heart health, for zone 2, or for fat loss is going to be dependent on you, but it's going to be really dependent on the goal.
Awesome, thank you. If you are unable to walk, and you can't support a step goal, how do you find an equivalent goal in cycling or rowing?
That's a really good question. And then for some of my folks who have had an issue and they can't get steps, or steps are contributing to like a pain or like a knee thing or whatever, I would prescribe minutes of these other forms, cardio modalities per week to shoot for, depending on your goal and who you are. I would find the one that does work, and then have like a certain number of minutes that we're trying to get throughout the week versus steps. Now, if we're looking at something daily, then that we would try to get like X amount of minutes per session. That's what I would focus on, as opposed to steps.
Awesome, thank you. Should we be lifting to total fatigue with each set?
Such a good question. It depends on the goal. So we have, Gina is a competitive power lifter. She is testing to see how much she can possibly lift in, for instance, her deadlift. After Gina does one of these, she should not be able to do any more, because she is trying to figure out her absolute max lift, and she's a power lifter. So more so for my folks, they're just trying to get stronger and build muscle. Every set, I would love to see y'all live in about a 7 or 8 out of 10 intensity. 10 would be Gina. 1 would be a walk in Laurelhurst Park. Okay. So I love the idea of like a 7 out of 8. We call that RPE. So rate of perceived exertion. I give recommended RPE to all of my folks in their program. Some people will go by percentages from the week prior. I don't do that because there's so many variables that play into how intense you can train on a given day. So if I set you up with percentages, but you have, a horrible night of sleep the night before, you're super stressed out, you were unable to fuel adequately because of your schedule and you only got one meal in as opposed to two. We go for RPE. So it's how you feel on that day. What's your 7 or 8 out of 10 on that day? And then 7 or 8 out of 10, we talked about in relation to RPE, what that looks like. And then I mentioned this in the PowerPoint, RIR, so reps in reserve. You should have about 2 or 3 left in you to do well. That's a good way to gauge.
Do you have any instructions around protein timing?
Protein timing. I think nutrition, especially protein and nutrition timing, there's a little bit of we're missing the forest for the trees here. The importance is what you get in 24 hours in a day. If you have the time to really get down nitty gritty, I do think that in terms, I just brought this up prior to the other question, adequate fuel is important and digestion time. So you want to go into a workout. You never want to train fasted, folks, please. Nobody, do not train fasted. That muscle tissue is precious. Okay. We do not need to be catabolic. I don't need you tapping into it for energy. So always make sure that you do have a meal in before you train. Now, this can be small. This can be more like I was saying, like a 20 to 30 grams of protein. We always want to have a little carbohydrate in there as well. We want to chill on the fat though, because that's harder to digest before you train. In terms of timing, it's going to be however long it takes you to digest. I know some people need an hour to an hour and a half. I know some people can eat a meal and it takes 20 minutes. So as long as it's digested and you feel good and you can go into your session, that's all that really matters.
Awesome. I think that is all of our questions. So thank you so much, Allyson, for presenting today. It's been an absolute honor to have you here. Just as a reminder for everyone, we will be sending out the recording and Allyson's slides, and she's kindly shared her contact information for anyone who has more personal questions that they would like to ask just one-on-one. Feel free to reach out to Allyson. And we appreciate you spending your lunch hour with us, and we look forward to seeing you next time. Have a great afternoon, everyone.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you.